Hey everyone, welcome back to Agile After Dark. In tonight's episode, we have our friend and digital Agile expert Jessica, aka Connie, aka Captain My Captain, to talk about using Agile in creating digital deliverables. How do we get past the UX design and development gateways and get those people involved with Agile teams? And as usual, we have some drinks and have a few laughs. Hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to Agile After Dark, the podcast that addresses Agile topics not talked about in the light of day. I'm your host, Greg Adams-Woodford, sitting here. And with me today, sitting over there, is my co-host, Brandon Gartley, and resident nerd.
What's up, buddy?
Hey, by the way, I've noticed here, I don't see a lot of nerd background stuff in this podcast.
That's because I give you the general outline so that you don't get distracted about all the nerd stuff.
Got it.
Because then you get all kind of riled up.
Yeah,
and then the rants come early.
It's true. Yeah, we like to leave them we try to spread them out, right? So I do, when I see the nerd copy, I do get a little
kind of starts to twitch a little bit.
A little bit. Yeah. Well, today we have a special guest here with us in the Apollo 13 studios in the Heartland. We've only had one minor situation with the Apollo 13, but we fixed it. We think at least temporarily.
Hatches back up.
We got some duct tape on that, so that should be good.
Yep.
But we do have a special guest for today. This is Jessica, and I'm not going to even try to say your last name because I think it's Italian or Swedish or something like that. So if you could just
Sicilian.
Oh, Sicilian.
Very,
okay,
very
so
he's trying to put Scandinavian and Italian together, and that's probably where.
I mean, to be fair, I actually am Scandinavian, and my husband is Sicilian. So
I knew there was a reason I said that. So what? How do you pronounce your last name, Jessica?
Guistolise, which is
Guistolise.
not at all the way that it is spelled. And so actually. And when we make our reservations, because it's Guistolise. So really, like if we're making a reservation and we get called up, it's like party of four. And so instead we just
so
make.
when you're at the bar having a drink, you're like, what
was that us? That wasn't even a word. So instead we make our reservations under Morgan, as in Captain, and then it's just much easier. And Morgan, party of four.
Like when they fly you up.
Full on Captain stance. We are here.
So, Jessica, now that we have a little bit of background on your restaurant reservation strategy,
which is important,
how did you first come across Agile in your sort of journey? I always hate saying that word, but in your
on my journey.
Yeah, in your journey, in your Agile journey, where were you first introduced to it?
When I was a little lad. Well, you wouldn't be a lad. But.
No. Surprise! I'm just kidding. So actually, I ran across Agile in kind of a different way. I started off in recruiting, and I was recruiting project managers, and that was kind of my specialty, was like more kind of project management, that side of things from an application development standpoint, and then started to run into Scrum Masters as I was doing some of my recruiting, and just listening to them talk, I was like, whoa, that makes sense. That what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
This whole project management people, they're kind of wonky.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and they're just the way that they talked about the way that work gets done, like the Scrum Master side of it, and then into Agile coaching, like that stuff made way more sense to me than like we're gonna write up this whole long 6-month, 9-month thing and cross our fingers, I guess.
Right.
So it just made a lot more sense to me, and so I moved into account management and met a bunch of people from a big box retailer. And through networking, and I actually ended up working there because they were like, "Oh, you get this stuff, cool. Like we want, come on board. We'll teach you, what you should know, and in general, we like your thought process." And so that's how I ended up there.
What disciplines were you working in inside of the company? Were you working in like mobile or digital, or what was the?
You nailed the two that I was working in. So I started off in mobile, and then moved into Digital.com. For a while, and then I got sucked right back into mobile.
So what happens when you do too good of a job?
I don't. They're like, come back.
Victim of your own success. You need to do my strategy, which is called career growth through incompetence, falling up. It's coming out in a bookstore near you soon.
Or actually, we should have that be like a instructional tour. What are those those motivational speakers?
Yeah. And
you're kind of like the antithesis to the motivational speaker.
I've had this whole conversation with Brandon. It's like it's my favorite thing to do is I work with a bunch of people who give 150%. And so that extra 50% that they're giving means I got to do 50% less. So it's like corporate drafting.
it's basic math.
Yeah, it's corporate. Yeah. It's corporate drafting. It's like in NASCAR when they get behind, they draft. So if you get enough of those 150 percenters, I'm comfortable operating around 18% for the most part.
Really,
Once
I was going with like
that,
4 or 5.
Yeah. Well, on a good day, but
Okay.
usually I can handle about 18%. So that's where
he saves it up for the podcast.
There you go.
I do. Okay, so that's great. So welcome to the studio. What's your first impressions of the studio, by the way?
It's very silver.
It's very silver.
Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
and the hatch likes to fall down.
The hatch does like to fall down.
And really, I think Apollo 13 was like the perfect name for the studio.
Totally. But basically stuck together with like, what do we have? Do we have some rubber bands? How do we patch this back together? Absolutely.
Exactly. And we're probably not going to land on the moon, but we already know that going in. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we're not. We have the expectations are set right.
We'll still shoot for the stars.
Yeah.
So,
You know what? We landed in the heartland.
We did land in the heartland, not the moon.
Aw.
Yeah, right?
This is pretty cool though. The setup is really like very impressive.
Yeah, it's gotten better over time. It works for us. So let's talk a little about today's episode called "Let's Get Digital." Let me hear your Agile talk, which.
Let's
that
get
stupid
digital.
song
Yeah,
in
you
my
can't
head.
see me, but I'm
Digital.
definitely like
Let's get
digital.
I'm gonna just.
Hey,
excuse
you
me.
invited me here.
I did. Brandon does the titles. I just want to make sure everybody knows that. Brandon, what is this all about?
What is this about? Well, today, kind of to outline what we're going to be covering. So we are talking about digital and agile because we have Jessica, who's been at a large big box company, who's done a lot of changes in a world that's fairly competitive these days, and really made a mark there. So kind of talking about a few things. So one thing is the evolution of digital work from being kind of a classic waterfall project to being more agile. And then some of the consistent barriers we're running into with the nature of digital work. Digital work has transformed, and I've worked in that in the past as well. I mean, what it was at the beginning, I used to be able to like publish things to the web, which tells you something. And then what are some of the new things out there, like tools, approaches, etc., that will take agile digital work to the next level? Like Nitin said, let's take it to the next level, Greg.
Take it to the next level.
So yeah, those are the things that we kind of wanted to cover today. And we'll probably veer off in several different directions because I think it's a really interesting topic because we talk a lot with agile kind of software development. That's kind of like the sweet spot, right? And we've run into a lot of different stuff, but digital I think is kind of an interesting space.
Well, I think the other thing that's interesting about what you just said is that you get the we're special. We really aren't set up to do agile, right? And so you get a lot of, whether it's content development, whether it's this, the digital things, sometimes data. You can apply these principles to any sort of work that you're doing. It doesn't really matter. And the graphic design, I've done with graphic designers before as well.
But should you apply it to any sort of work?
Well, maybe not something like construction where there are limits and.
Although I have a coach that talks about construction all the time.
But there are sort of gates that you have to go through with construction that I think might lend itself to a more traditional approach. But that said, for most of the things that we deal with in the world of digital software, most things that are being done online, in some capacity, you can apply it right to most of those things. So I think that's an important takeaway because you always get the we're special argument.
Yeah, and digital is also really important too because that's customer facing.
Yep. Well, and that also means you can do a lot more because a lot of the time digital is doing UX types of activities and you really get to do agile the way it's meant to because you're getting feedback sooner rather than later from the customer. And I think that's really important.
As long as you're actually doing agile.
Right.
That's the important part, right? Feedback from the customer really is important. And if you're not actually getting that feedback or garnering that feedback, then
Yeah, and it's also, as we talked about in last week's podcast, that it's not just getting, like you said, not just getting the feedback.
It was a couple weeks ago. But
how do you? Well, they don't know that. We could be doing this every day. They would never know, right? We don't make any references to current topics or anything. But what we talked about a couple of weeks ago was this idea of how you actually collect that information, how you use it in product development strategies, and that's kind of thing. So you're right. You can get the feedback, but you can't just if somebody's yelling at you about something that they don't like, you have to understand how to process that information to be what it needs to be.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the things that we want to cover is, and I had experience with this, and I think you probably did as well, Jessica, and even Greg, possibly, in his various startups and what have you in the digital space, is digital kind of lended itself to a very waterfall way of approaching things. Okay, so basically I need to build this site. Let's start with that. Okay, so I'm going to and then UX came along, which really even put another gateway ahead of design, right?
Giant gate.
Right? So it's like, okay, now we have this UX stuff. We're going to pull audiences. We're going to create personas, which we talked about in the last podcast 2 weeks ago. And, okay, we'll figure that whole up from the UX side of the content and how it's organized. And, maybe we'll even try to have people point at different, things on the UX. So there's some sort of feedback. But then, okay, now we get that finalized by 6 different people. Okay, that's 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. Okay, now we'll go into design. Well, how it looks, that's a big thing. And you're going to have to go through several iterations there because, you're going to have 4 people on the client side, and 3 of them are like, oh, I really like that. And the other one's like, I don't like that color on that button, right? So then they're going to go back and forth. And that's another 4 to 5 months, right? And then you finally get into development and they're like, okay, well, we have the whole design. So we have to now develop all this stuff. And then we'll finally do a little bit of testing, right? And then we'll just put it out on the web.
If you're lucky enough to have time to do that.
Right, exactly. Exactly. So it kind of, in a way, based on the work. And so the first part I'm saying is, starting from scratch. If we're building a whole new something out there, I'm not saying the base site for a company. I'm talking about, okay, we have this whole other product, Greg, that we want to launch, and we need not just to be a subsect of the existing website. We have this whole new thing that we need to build. Waterfall kind of makes sense based on that, but Agile also, you get, more of the actual rapid feedback. So I'm kind of curious from your experience, Jessica, is waterfall sometimes better to do for some project like the newer stuff, or
is ridiculous?
He is being a little bit ridiculous right now. I mean, that's the thing about Agile, though. I mean, let's say you do this waterfall event, and you spend 8, 9, 10, 12 months putting together this new product, and then you finally get it out there. Well, I mean, especially in something like retail, everything moves so fast that by the time you get it out there 12 months later, God, even if you can do it in 3 months, by the time you get it out there, it's not necessarily applicable anymore. I mean, think about who we're competing against. Mm-hmm. Consistently, not just especially in retail, but across the board.
You can say Amazon. I mean, Amazon is just the constant.
It's constant. There's new stuff all of the time. I mean, I think I got an update yesterday, and there's some new stuff that I really am enjoying.
Yeah,
hooray!
I know. And so
you guys remember when you got you can now get liquor delivered to you? Yay!
Yeah.
But right?
This is very interesting. We get a knock on the door.
Right?
I just ordered something on my phone. Excuse me. Watch out for Apollo 13.
But I mean, you have to compete against that, and so waiting months and months to get something out is just it's not going to work anymore.
I can't believe that I'm hearing this. That specifically in this digital space, how anybody would still think that a waterfall approach is what year is this? I mean, it's the most applicable to digital than any other thing. Because,
but we understand it, and also it works with our funding model.
Well, the funding model is a whole other pod. We got to do that. That's one thing we should probably talk
about it now too. But I mean, I think to your point, Jessica, is I talked about the UX and getting the full parts of approval on that, and doing the design and get the full parts of approval on that. You go 12 months out. Those people that gave approval most likely aren't even there anymore.
Or they definitely don't remember it.
Right.
I mean, I've been through quote unquote UAT sessions where they're like, wait, what does this do? Mm-hmm. We put this together so long ago that I don't remember what I asked for. You wrote down all these requirements for us, and I honestly don't. And again, I'm not really invested in this project anymore, but
which is why would you even ask them in the first place? Would be my
also. Did I say that button was red or green?
Yeah, right. And then you have to go back to the design and say no, this is literally you have check marks near every single thing on the design. But they approved this and this and this and this and this. Yeah,
but I think part of this is, and you can tell me how you feel about it. It's streamlining. So at one of the companies I worked at, we did this thing called Lightning Labs, and it was literally week-long investment of people's time. Yeah. and they would get 700 people, not 700 people, but there were like 30 people probably for a week working on this. And it was really just prototyping. And it was sort of like, why you really need 3 people to sign off on this? Why are you inviting 20 people that are never going to sign off or never going to know, right? It's like, I don't know what it is about the digital world that all these, signing a piece of paper that says, yes, I sign off on this. Like, what is it? That's a total CYA move. I don't see why people are still doing that.
100%. It's entirely CYA. And it's because it makes people feel important. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, oh yeah, I was totally like, I was responsible for this piece of it. And so instead of having it be like a team event or what, I mean, I've had people, from a stakeholder standpoint, claim the project as their project.
Yeah, well, that we did the same thing when we'd sign off on these releases that we had, and literally from the president, every single VP who had nothing to do with anything, they were like in services, they had to sign this piece of paper to say, yes, we sign off on this, even though they had nothing to do with it. So I asked one day, I said, when I first started, I'm like, what happens to this piece of paper that everybody signed? Oh, I file it over here in a drawer somewhere. I'm like, and nobody ever sees it again? No. So, it's ridiculous.
It is.
But if nobody ever sees it, then maybe you don't need to see why. So you can just forge signatures.
Well, that's why I canceled. That's why I did. I didn't. Oh no, I just said we're not doing that anymore. And they were like, "What do you mean?" I said, "We're not doing that. It's not needed." And you're right. I got a little resistance, but it was like, I checked with finance and legal. They're like, "No, we don't need it."
Yeah. So I get it with, and I'm actually taking Greg's like curmudgeon-y, like I'm going to challenge things today, but I kind of get it with, okay, we already have something out there, we're making updates. I kind of get it. Like we can kind of cut some stuff where we don't have to get constant approvals. But what if it really is like a new digital experience?
How do you know if that digital experience is even viable if you don't test it out on actual people?
Hello.
Yeah.
I mean, really, like, are you going to spend X amount of money, X amount of time, X amount of, just effort in general, and people invested in this thing, and then you put it out there and it's a dud. There's nobody wants to use it.
Well, you used X quite a few times. What about UX? Because UX was, that whole practice was built around trying to curb some of those issues.
Again, I mean, I think it definitely, first of all, it moves way too fast for a UX design to be viable 12 months later. And 2, I mean, how many products do we really have right now that are, especially from an enterprise standpoint, that are truly user friendly?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Think about the user experience that that associates have when they're trying to sell you something at any kind of retailer.
You're talking about like POS systems, like where they're they're just trying to ring you out, and they're
and it's completely impossible. And it's because while UX is great, and I think it's definitely needed, I think it's still a relatively new practice, and not every product that we put out there right now is as inherent. That's the word. Okay. It's not as inherent as like Facebook or Instagram. I mean, like somebody has to go in and write training around it, and they have to teach people how to use it, so that 16-year-old kids or 21-year-old kids in college are able to do their job. Mm-hmm. And so while UX is great, we haven't necessarily gotten our UX practices to a point where we don't have to do all of that.
Well, and with the design stuff, there's a lot of gold plating that happens, as opposed to just
gold plating's a good.
Get it out, see if it works, get the feedback, and then go back in for another cycle, right?
Yeah,
Instead, it's like, no, we got to design this. Analysts do the same thing, right? It's just design's version of doing analysis.
Or my favorite thing, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to do a whole new redesign for one like tiny piece of functionality, like. Oh, that needs a redesign. And so then we end up all the way back at the beginning with this 3 months of, just starting all over the process when really you could just change a couple of things and see how that goes. Mm-hmm.
So that brings me to the question of, is it on the folks that are delivering it where we're kind of running into those issues, or is it from the client side where they're kind of wanting to see a full baked concept of what should be out there, or is it a mix of both?
I mean, I would say it's a mix of both.
Okay.
It depends on it always comes down to people, right? It depends on the people that you're working with. If the people that you're working with are comfortable with seeing like just a kind of a wireframe and here's what we're thinking and show me the MVP, Or if there's people who feel like they need to have ownership over every single tiny piece of it and have to, again, sign off on every single tiny piece of it. It really depends on the people that you're working with, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Greg, who, makes me dot every I and cross every T before we get on to any show. And then he reads the script right before we get on. Mm-hmm. But I think that's a good place for us to take a break. But we have a new little thing in our Agile After Dark.
Sponsors.
Whoa.
We've been looking for sponsors for a long time, and we've got some ideas. Some of them, based around some beverages, but this one's a new one. And so we're gonna have a commercial break here, and this commercial break or transition or whatever you want to call it is brought to you by the word transformation. Oh. Transformation. When you want to do a reorg, but you need to sound positive. I'm your host, Greg Adams Woodford, sitting here, and sitting over there with me today is my co-host, Brandon Gartley. And Apollo 13 is proving itself to be Apollo 13 and coming apart. Close the hatch.
Close the hatch.
Close the hatch. All right, let's do that again. That was even sassy.
I know. I looked over there see if Sally she's just chilling over there.
And that was sitting there for a couple of minutes.
Yeah. I think it was an extra drink run.
Yeah. All right, I want to thank our sponsor, the word transformation again. Now we're back here. What we didn't mention last time, Brandon, was how do we get feedback, or how do we get feedback from our listeners? So are we up to 12 or 13 now?
In terms of
listeners?
No, I think we're over 20.
Seriously?
Well, I think Jessica might have listened to every episode.
Right.
A couple of times.
Yeah, a couple of times. So maybe she doubled up.
All right. Well, maybe. So okay, we'll say 15.
Yeah.
We'll say 15.
Yeah. And she's coughing because they're, Sass, the Agile After Dark cat, is here. And
but mellow today for some reason. She's not climbing all over us and.
She's super
chill.
chill.
We didn't give her cat. That was our last guest said, "Oh, give her some catnip."
Yeah,
I was like, "That's a brilliant freaking idea."
Would not be a good idea. So, Brandon, how do people give us feedback?
So you can go to feedback@agileafterdark.com, or you can go to I've created a new email address.
Okay,
Greg.
Okay.
Because the GAW feedback@agileafterdark.com was where we were trying to send people to do rants. It was a little too complicated. Was it GAE? Right. So I created a rants at agileafterdark.com.
Okay, so that's good. So if you have a rant, specific rant, if you have a, are you done?
Yeah,
Jessica?
I'm working on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you have a specific issue around ranting and want to rant, please go to rants@agileafterdark.com.
Yep, and look at previous episodes at agileafterdark.com.
Yep, they're all there.
Yep.
All right, so first of all, let's just, Jessica, you okay?
Oh, yeah. No, I'm
Okay,
fine.
we are here to remind you with Jessica. Jessica's last name, let me see if I can try to pronounce it.
Morgan?
Yes.
Party of four?
Guistolise?
You're so close.
Okay,
So
good.
that was juice.
Yeah, Guistolise.
Juice.
Hey, I don't want to be associated with that right now. Juice. Come on.
So we are drinking as usual. I have my.
It is Agile After Dark.
It is Agile After Dark. I have my drink, which is my typical bourbon drink, straight up. Jessica, what are you having?
Jameson Rock Splash Water.
Yeah.
I noticed that you relocated your drink to a more suitable container versus the large,
I did.
very large coffee cup that you came in with. So I was like, whoa.
Well, it was a to-go.
Okay, it was a to-go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a go cup.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Where are you from, by the way, Jessica? I get a little hint of an accent.
In case you can't tell, I'm from Minnesota.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. Land at 10,000 lakes. And some real nice casserole.
Yeah, the
So-
hot dish. Is it hot dish there?
Yeah, you know what? It actually is hot dish. I was trying to, kind of dumb it down for you folks here in the Heartland. But it is the hot dish.
Does hot dish have the tater tots on the top?
Well, mine is a tater tot hot dish. I got mine from Peg. It's a big head in every padlock. So.
Good.
Sure, you betcha, don't you know it?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
I feel like
Oh, gosh,
I'm
golly.
in a different
You know,
part of the country. We've left the heartland.
That's my alter ego.
Yeah, right, yes. What's her name again?
Connie.
Connie.
Oh,
Yeah.
Connie. Connie's great with the hat dash.
We like when Connie joins us at dinner. It's
Yep.
really fun.
Connie usually joins after a couple of drinks. You know.
Absolutely.
And Brandon,
Okay.
what are you up to? There?
So I'm doing Doers and Ginger. So
Which is very weird.
Yeah.
When I made your last drink, was it okay? A little heavy on the ginger?
yeah, too much ginger.
Okay.
And it's like Doers with a splash of ginger.
Well, I know, but some people splash.
The truth is,
some
the reason
people-
I have Doers is because I mistake that Connie, really loves her Jameson.
Jameson?
Yeah,
He's a real,
Jameson. Yeah.
Oh, sure.
So I thought it was Doers, and so I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, did you say sorry?
Yes. Because that's my Canadian,
I love it. I absolutely love that. I can't believe you just. I'm so sorry.
Now, it's good that we're drinking because Brandon, I think, is going to launch into some research nerd topic. So I'm going to be drinking this whole
Yes,
time.
absolutely.
I'll check in a little bit.
So, in this next section, we kind of want to get into some of the consistent barriers that we're kind of running into with the nature of digital work. We touched on it a little bit in the previous section, and we talked a little bit during the break, but kind of want to get into some of my nerd stuff. Not a CRISPR this time, Greg. What's a CRISPR?
Although I did learn what a CRISPR is. Now,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. So his wife is very disappointed. He didn't know what a CRISPR was. But
She
anyway,
was. She really was.
So in terms of kind of the nature of digital and how important it really is, McKinsey research shows that companies have lofty ambitions in this space. They expect digital initiatives to deliver annual growth and cost effectiveness of 5 to 10% or more in the next 3 to 5 years. So as we talked about, this being a direct line to the client, the investment there makes sense. But if we're delivering slowly, like we talked about in the last section, and we're doing it once every year optimistically, what are we really doing? So I kind of want to get into some of the barriers we're running into in terms of whether it's team kind of compilation, how we're approaching it instead of not doing the gateways to the UX design and development and deployment. I put it to Connie / Jessica.
Oh, sure.
In terms of you face these, we talked about it, but you kind of face some of these obstacles from the traditional way of looking at it in the past. And what were some of your experiences with working in that very important big box company that had to be reactive given what the market's doing? Kind of what were some of the changes that you saw happen? And Greg's going to interrupt me because he has to phrase my question another way.
No, actually, what I want to do is I'm not even sure I understand what digital means at this point as we've been talking. Like, how is digital different from software development? Versus what is different about digital?
Yeah, I mean, for me, digital is that front-facing, and I'll add on the kind of the front-facing, whether it's mobile, whether it's applications, those sort of things where it's direct consumer consumption of whatever it is that you're trying, whatever product, Greg, whatever product you're trying to sell, that is a direct line to your customer, right? And so that's a front-facing line to your customers beyond actually being in the store. And even in the store, there's a lot of digital components to that as well, right? So for me, that is like what we always talk about. What does your customer need? I think the digital space, mobile apps, web, what have you, is like the front line of that. Does that make sense?
Well, it does, but if you so that does clarify it a little bit. But how is that any different from any software product that's web based? That's digital.
I know where you're coming from. You're coming from like your past experiences of like your startup stuff, like the learning for K through 12.
Yeah.
Literally that thing is what you're
it's an
delivering.
application.
It's an application, right? What I'm talking from so my background in terms of PR and marketing.
That's what I was going to say. To me, it sounds more like a marketing
Yes.
thing than it is a product.
So that's where I'm maybe more focused, and mostly because kind of Jessica's experience is more in that in terms of we're trying to get you in our experience of what you're seeing to then purchase a actual physical object.
So that's what it's more of on the marketing side of things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, well,
that's
I
what
mean,
I would.
it's
That's
stuff
what
like can you like if you're looking at a product, do you have customer reviews, and do you have here's what the other stuff that they buy with it? Do you have accessories, or if you looked at this as a
Greg has a lot of accessories.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I don't know what that means.
Including all of the reading glasses that he loses. And
yes, that is true. I do. I
actually lost one at the bar last night.
Yeah, I just left him on the table there at the brewery.
Also, Danny.
So
Danny does the same thing.
Yeah. So anyway, that's why.
Did you leave Danny at the bar?
I don't remember.
I don't think we should call Danny an accessory.
Well, he's Danny Dojo.
Yeah, he is Danny D. Danny D.
Danny D. His team's already said.
I do think that does make sense as a delineation because even
well, let's start there because that's kind of like Jessica's background, right? In terms, and that me too.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
But
that's what I thought.
But we can get into kind of whether it is a software as a service. That's a different approach. But I think it's. Save that question for when, Jessica schools you and all of the stuff that you don't know.
Okay, good.
And then you can kind of give it into it. So Jessica, kind of the main thing that I'm kind of interested in is your experience with, I think you talked to me in the past about how you came into those gated ways of delivering things that we talked about in the first section to try to transform transformation. Brought to you by Transformation.
Brought to you by
how you changed that approach with kind of in that digital space in that big box company.
We've kind of talked about this before about you do like months of research from a user experience, user design, architecture type work.
Yep.
Work, and then it kind of trickles down into all of the approvals that we've talked about, and then goes through all of those different stage gates. And one of the things that we experimented with that really was truly the most effective was you just put those user experience designers in the team.
Yeah.
And then you're doing it as you're working on it. The user experience designer has a better understanding of what works and what doesn't, because they are talk about creatives as much as any coder is a creative. These they want to do the design of a lifetime, but if they're not talking to the people who are doing the actual development, they might be designing something and getting quote unquote approvals for something that's literally not even possible.
Yeah.
So now we've sold the entire world to folks, and we're like, wow, that's really pretty and seems like it would work really well. But
that's where I was getting, because in
the
past,
you're
no, but in the past, because I think it's two things. I think it is typically focused on more of like a marketing or adoption kind of a thing. But when we embedded UX on a team, which was really radical, this is 10 years ago, okay? And
radical man.
Yeah, before Post-its.
Before Post-its, when I had my cards. When we did that, it changed the entire way the team worked, because you had somebody there and they weren't guessing. And I think that's the biggest problem in software development. If you don't have a person working on, let's say, the front end or the user experience, they're just going to focus on functionality, and they don't really care how it looks or what the experience is like, right? And so what
they want to make it function in a really cool way,
right?
Because
which
they're
is
also
what they do,
super creative,
right?
Yeah.
But if you get somebody in UX who can work with developers, that's the key.
It's interesting because I'm thinking about, we talked about management debt in the past, and we talk about managers that go off in a room and say, this is what the client needs, and this is what we should deliver from a software standpoint. I wonder if from the UX standpoint, it's almost very similar, right? Where they're kind of like, oh, I know because I've done this research, I have these personas, I have all this stuff, I have this concept of this is what they need. But to your point, Jessica, of the developers and the testers and so the creatives, as we talked with Nitin on a previous podcast, they're creatives, they're the problem solvers. So let's not take them out of the equation, right?
Right. Absolutely. They're the ones, and honestly, those are oftentimes the people who know the product even better than the people who step in to do, user experience design, who may have been on here. Let's be real honest. They have the opportunity to jump around like none other, because everybody wants to pay them all of the monies, right? And so you generally, at least in my experience, it's kind of it's a revolving door of people, and then they each have their own ideas. Well, developers, like they've been with this product for, however long. And so then oftentimes they actually know the designs and the pattern designs better than the people who are working, who want to redesign.
Well, I think worse yet, you get into a situation where the UX people come in at the end when they've built all the functionality and they're like, oh no, we got to change this whole thing. And they're like, well, you can't, because that completely destroys the functionality that we need to have the thing work.
Right.
And so if they come in at the very last minute, which is typical, I think, of how these engagements go, then they become the hated group inside of a software business, because they're like, oh, those guys are going to come in here and they're going to have us make all some changes at the end.
So my question to you, Jessica, is when you're talking about bringing UX people onto the team, kind of how does that dynamic work? What's that kind of team structure within the digital space that you've seen that's been really effective?
The way that I've seen it be really effective is literally they're sitting with we had scrum teams sitting with the scrum teams. And so as we go through, backlog refinement, they're doing the same thing. They're like, okay, here's the stuff that's upcoming. Here's where I'm needed. And they are doing their UX designs literally just before the start of the sprint. And then we do the sprint, and they're right there. They're sitting right there. And so we can ask questions and we can say, is this a design pattern that makes sense? Are there other ways of doing this? And having those consistent conversations that are daily, sometimes hourly, it has been super helpful. And then you're doing, just enough, just in time, right. And your design gets out there and we can go and talk to people about whether or not this is actually functional.
So when you phrase it that way, I mean, is the UX person that's on that team kind of almost like the product owner? Because I mean, that's what you just described to me is you have someone there that's constantly there to have that context and have that conversation about, are we approaching it this right way? And they're embedded in the team so they understand how it's being done. I don't know if that's true or not, but like the way that you just described it, I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting as a concept.
Well, when we did it, we had them sitting there every day. And so when the developers, the hard thing for us was getting the developers to know at what point they needed to ask what question, right? So the developers because it was a new thing for developers to have this guy sitting there. His name is Olu. Shout out to Olu. Yeah. Sorry. We just happened to have a guy named Olu who was awesome. And shout out to Olu. We'll never hear this.
Olu.
But once they figured out, like, they would literally talk to him every day to say, hey, we're thinking about doing it this way. What do you think? And he'd be like, well, let me mock up some things that you guys can do. And then they would mock it up, and then the developers would take his mock-ups and then they would go build it. Right. So he didn't have any product ownership. He was there as an advisor for the thing that the developers don't really think about.
Yeah. And so I'm not trying to say that the UX person is taking over the product owner position, but I'm, as a product owner that's there, they're like the business voice.
Yes.
So I'm saying the UX person is not there necessarily like taking on every story.
No.
Right. So that's why I'm trying to say it's more like a product owner type role.
Yeah, they're consulted more than they are. But again, you'd have to make sure the developers know when the right time to ask the question. How much does this UX person intercede? At what point? You know what I mean? There is a relationship that needs to be built there that's more complex than it sounds, because they need to learn each other, and they're the same animal basically.
Right, and the UX person is also partly the voice of the customer too.
Yeah.
I mean, like how is this going to be the most usable? Yep. And can we get to a point where we're not having to train our associates or train our car salesman or train our whoever how to use this thing? And so they do have part of the voice of the customer, but what they have behind that is also a whole lot of usability research and experience in how is this working right now today in the real world. I mean, we're all in the real world, but how is this working today in all of these different areas, and how can we apply that to this specific product? Whereas the product owner is really talking about like what are the priority items that we want to go after and that's their part of the voice of the customer versus the UX voice of the customer.
Right. And so I guess I'm going to keep harping on this because I'm on to something. I'm telling you, I'm on to something. I'm not going to let it go.
Hey, you should send it to rants at agileafterdark.com.
Yeah. Okay. This is a Brandon rant. Here we go. Which is, the Scrum Master doesn't have parts of their stories. The product owner doesn't have parts of the stories. The team has part of the stories. And I think what a lot of digital teams, and don't scoff at what I'm trying to say, Jessica.
How dare you sneeze?
I said good day.
Good day.
No, but in terms of I think if you're talking in financial services, H&PS, and you're talking about, okay, I'm going to have a UX person on this team, most people are going to say, okay, what's their stories? What are they doing? What are they working on? Right? What is the stuff that they're working on? And are they dedicated to a team?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Yes. Okay, great. So if they're dedicated to a team, but they're not actually taking stories per se, but if they're kind of the constant voice from...
Well, they have their own stories, right? There's things that they're working on that are stories.
Well, that's what
that
I'm
are
asking.
outside of, yeah. So for instance,
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, so here's another example of this. So we would take our UX person when we would do test groups, focus groups, we'd do by feature. He was always at those. Anytime there was a customer interaction, he would be in those meetings, so he would get that information. A developer would never want to sit through that and do that. That's not what they're doing.
But is that a story?
It might turn into a story, right? Depends on what. I mean, they're doing work. They're doing tasks. They're building wireframes, and they're working on specific parts of the application. They're actually doing real work on the team. It's not like they're just there as a. Like I said, the word consulting, but it's because they don't have dev tasks, but they have tasks. Now, a product owner doesn't have tasks, but they have tasks, and they probably do have stories.
Oh, I hate tests, but anyway.
But they probably do have stories. I mean, they should have stories. They should be able to articulate their work, and if they can't, that's a problem.
So what I have to ask is, if they have stories, are they part of this? Are they working on a story with the dev team?
Most of the time. Or they might have their own like wireframes, for instance. Hey, I just met with these guys. We talked about this. I'm going to build this wireframe to inform what we're going to be doing on the dev side. So that would be a story that they would have.
We played with it a lot of different ways of doing it. I mean, you can do anything from like having a UX spike story, right? So that's where they're doing the research and trying to get some specific questions answered. We've done it where they have, they have tasks or things that they need to do that are part of the definition of ready.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so in order for a story to get to ready, all of that work has to be done first.
Okay.
And that actually makes things go so much smoother once you get into this.
And I was going to bring this up before when you mentioned this. Again, I've said this before on this podcast, this very podcast.
This one.
Finishing software does not mean it's done. There's sales training, there's services training, there's support training. There's all this stuff that goes on that happens after software is done. And Agile only gets to the end of software. And so the UX person typically really helps enable not only building a better product, so there's the least amount of training needed, but also when you're creating the training, the people that are creating the training, like from the services or the support organization, they would work with them to make sure that, to explain how what the theory is behind it, right? Mm-hmm. So they would also have that part of the...
Okay, I'm seeing it. Now where does design fit into all of this? Silence. Silence. Ooh.
Well, I don't know what I mean. You're making design sound like it's a separate thing from what the team is doing, and I don't think that it is.
No, and I think it's important for the team to be part of it.
Yeah, but I'm saying design in terms of the
the
actual
80s, okay?
look and feel. Hey, I grew up in the 80s.
No, but I mean,
Team you, Craig. You made me admit that.
No, but the design is part of what the team is doing. That's why bringing the UX person on is so critical.
Okay, all right.
When that's
Agile After Dark. Sorry, go ahead.
That's why having the developers being able to talk to them at the same time and be like, wow, that's a really cool thing that you just wanted to go get sign off on. But so that's going to take us 7 months to even come close to building exactly that. Like having the conversation of like, super cool. We literally don't have the technology for that at this point. Like, so please don't go get sign off on that.
Right. So when I'm talking about design, I'm talking about graphic design because I'm talking about digital. And so you're trying to get in design in terms of something else, I think.
I think that you, depending on how big the team is.
Because here's the thing. It's like, UX and design has started to come closer together and they're almost similar sort of people. But that's not necessarily true for kind of what I was talking about when you were asking marketing of a product that's going to get delivered. And Jessica's looking at me like, you're crazy. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, that's marketing and product marketing. That's not what we're talking about here.
Well, you're still delivering digital work to the customer that's going to have them purchase something, correct?
Yeah, I don't know why. I'm not sure what the design should be done as the product is evolving, right? You shouldn't have a separate design function.
Well, I agree with you, but what I'm trying to say to you is, because this is good. We're getting into it. Agile After Dark. Getting down into it. Is we've talked about the UX. I get it. I get exactly what you're saying. Usability, all this kind of stuff. And we're going to make changes, and they're part of the stories that the developers are working on. But where is the design part where you're actually changing something, how something looks?
Yeah, that's what they do that too. I would
argue that's what they do. A full redesign.
Well, I'm not talking about a full redesign. I'm just
that's what I'm saying. But that's what.
In the past, yes, right. But are graphic designers no longer useful anymore? Are they gone?
Part of what the UX person is doing is actually building those. Now we also had well, okay. So let me think about this for a second because you're making a good point.
Exactly.
So we outsource. We just that one team that I was talking about that I'm using as an example. We outsourced the graphics, the graphic design to it. We outsourced it to an internal group that was graphic designers.
Yeah.
So but they didn't. They just did what we told them to do. So they didn't have any. They had within the framework of the thing we asked them to do. They had all the creative, license to do what they want. Yeah, but they didn't have any kind of directional design for the product. That was UX and the product owner and product manager. They did not design, but we did have to outsource because that is but that's more of like a tasky thing.
Okay.
We had design libraries like pattern and design libraries.
That's the way. Another company I worked with had that.
So will you explain that to me? Because I don't know if our listeners will understand that.
Well, so it really is just like if you have like X plus X equals this, then this is the exact design that you'll use for that so that it's consistent across the board. And so
it's like a style guide.
Yeah.
And then we had a style guide, and then we had a graphics library. So all the graphics that were designed went into a repository, and then you go, oh, I need an on button. Oh, there it is. I can just grab that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're making updates to things that you're already selling for products, but I'm talking about we're launching something new.
Yeah, that's
I go back.
That company
the first section where I was like, because that makes totally sense, and I was like, almost for me, that's like the easy little chip. Like we can chip away at that pretty easily because having the UX people make updates to how it's being used in the actual digital space or whatever it is. Whatever I'm launching a new project.
Yeah. No,
sorry, product. Great.
Yep.
I'm launching a new product.
Yep.
And it's a whole new space. It's a whole new way of looking at this is a product, whether it's software or whether it's actual things being delivered to your door.
Well, remember the product that I'm referencing? And remember we had Kylie on 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
That was a brand new product in a brand new space.
Okay.
From scratch.
Right.
From an idea that we didn't want to do, if you remember.
Yes, exactly.
Brand new.
And you guys did a bunch of UX at the beginning. Well, you did a bunch of like that. So
I will say, but that's what we complained about was that it shouldn't have happened that way.
Okay.
And we remember they had the lightning lab that I described.
Yes, exactly.
One of my colleagues and I said, "This is stupid. We should do laser lab." Which is like 2 days, 4 people. We're doing laser labs. We're not doing lightning lab. We're
lasers on top of their heads.
No, we literally had that conversation. Like, this is ridiculous. We walked by and we're like 20 people in the room. We're like, this is ridiculous. This is a waste of time. And now it got people invested in the product. And so, you're launching a new product. So it helped in that way. But as far as functionally helping build a product, a waste of time. Total waste of time.
Okay.
So I would say there is obviously some visualization work that goes up front to say, okay, here's kind of what we're looking at and doing some wireframes just to check kind of what makes sense, doing some testing with the actual users ahead of time.
Yeah.
There should not be some gigantic concerted effort at the beginning. It should be that product was a test prep product. Okay, what does a test prep product have to have? It has to ask questions. The bank has to be randomized. It has to have the answers. It has to have some kind of a scoring methodology. It has to have some kind of game, what we choose to have gaming and, different kinds of rewards, intrinsic reward systems, blah, blah, blah. So these are the 6 things that it needs. We're just going to go and do those first, and then we'll see what happens.
So Greg's talking fast. I'm going to say, what about that kid that you really helped?
Yeah.
That was I'm going to slow him down here. He's get a little teary-eyed.
Don't make me go there. Don't make me go to that place, Brandon.
But from your experience, Jessica / Captain Morgan, what, in terms of the work that you did at that big box company, because you're actually trying to sell products that are coming to the door. Did you ever have that, because you worked in mobile, then digital and back in mobile, did you ever have that thing where we have this new product, or was all kind of still from the basic framework of what you guys already had?
A lot of it was still basic framework, although I did join a team that was starting to build kind of this new interface, basically.
Sure. Yeah.
And and I think the initial part of it, I wasn't part of the initial part of it, but it was really more of like a longer cycle of like, we're going to build this out entirely and we're going to make it as perfect as it can be before we, and part of it, and I mean, to be fair, part of it is about, do we make it so that this product is good enough when we release it to, that people won't automatically assume that it's broken.
Right.
That's the trick. Yep.
Or that it's completely unusable, and so I'm going to go back to using the thing that I'm super comfortable with.
Yeah.
And so there is a balance there where you have to say like, okay, we'll release to a point where it's good enough
to an early adopter group who knows what they're getting into. Right?
Yeah. So you have to be careful. I mean, you have to be careful with how you do it, because otherwise, like if you have a product and let's say it's product X and it gets out to everyone and everybody's like, can't use it. This product is total crap. Even no matter how many times you iterate on it, if you have that reputation as a product, your usability is just not going to be there.
Well, I'll tell you a story that is a massive example of this same problem.
Massive.
There was to the tune of $75 million. Okay.
Whoops.
And 3 years over date time delivery.
Sorry about that milestone.
Yeah. So I literally was hired by this company to fix that problem. And the problem was they did exactly what you described. They went in and just sat in a building and built a bunch of stuff, never got any feedback, assumed. And then when they got behind, they started asking questions of the users that were testing in such tricky ways that they didn't really know what they were answering so that they could get to their date. So for instance, it was supposed to be web ready, right? So you could actually access the application online from cloud service or whatever.
Is cloud service? Wow, that you've dealt with cloud stuff.
Too. We started that too.
Yeah.
And they essentially didn't even have any web functionality. They were using, I can't remember what they were using. They were using some web
CSS
framework. They were using some framework to say, oh, well, if you have to still deploy the one big server, but now we're using a web protocol to talk to the machines instead of something. It was like a total lie. It was a total lie because they had to get their date, and they could just say, well, we're using web framework. But it didn't mean anything. So I had to come in and go, you've been lied to for the last 2 years. Now it's probably going to be another 2 years until we can get it out. And that was a really nice 1 year of my life getting yelled at by customers. But they went to a small subset, asked them very pointed questions, and they did not do the right thing.
So that's a good transition into our next section. I think that we want to talk about when we come back from the break in terms of what are some of the things that have been out there since the Stone Ages when Greg was working on things, to more recent stuff that Jessica has been facing. And, what are some of the things that are out there in terms of getting past this issue of, all right, we need to have a full gated, pathway to getting something out. Obviously, that's not effective anymore. Having people on teams in the appropriate way, having, designs that are more kind of testing things out. And I think there's some conversation we can have after the break that really kind of gets into how are things that are there right now that can help us to get there, and then what are some of the things that, hey, maybe they're not there, and then we think, hey, let's talk to our friend Steve Thomas and get him to design some stuff so that we can get it out there. So send your feedback to feedback@agileafterdark.com. I think we've had a full kind of section rant here. So send your rant requests to rants@agileafterdark.com, and we'll see you after the break. So the funny thing is, she doesn't know this. So I was like, oh, okay, so she likes that stuff. So I told her I got it wrong and went and bought Doers.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did. So now I got Doers at the collab. I was like, oh, I'll probably trigger it. It's fine.
Yeah, somebody else.
Because I like to make sure that when people come here to do podcasts or whatever, we got their stuff, we're covered.
You gotta tell me next time and I'll bring stuff over.
Yeah, it's been a while since he kind of helped restock the cabinet.
Yeah, but he does go and get you drinks. I mean,
That's
all you
true.
have to do is.
Well, that's the first time I've done that, actually.
That was pretty smooth.
Well, it's the producer-director in me.
Well, I know what it's like to try to get out of them.
There's that too.
That too, yeah.
We're back. Hold on a second. That's right. We're back.
And we're back.
We're back. We're
High
back.
five.
I am high fiving that. And we're back.
We're back. We'll see you later. All right. Okay, what is this podcast called? Okay, so we're back here at agileafterdark.com. Would you like me to read it more? What's it?
I spent like 5 more minutes giggling about and we're back. That's one of my favorite sketches of all time. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
We're present.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
We're present. Okay, welcome back to Agile After Dark. Our podcast title is, that Brandon wrote, by the way, is Let's Get Digital.
Digital.
Digital Talk.
Let me get digital. Let me hear your Agile
Oh,
talk.
there you go.
Oh, dear. So I think
First chair.
First chair.
We want to try to get...
Hey, fellow first chair over here.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Of course.
Fellow
first chair.
nerds.
Yeah.
More like it. Okay.
Sorry, we're the best, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
Fellow the best.
Why would you not
Fellow
be
the
first chair?
best.
Because I wasn't in the band.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Sorry about
how are
it.
you first chair in anything else?
Yeah, okay. Well,
Yeah.
Ooh, solid point.
Yeah.
Solid point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Keep going, Greg.
all right. So we are back. And we talked a little bit about some of the methods in which we're using to get feedback directly from our customers in a digital capacity, so that we can make better decisions in an incremental way or in a sort of agile way, so that we can build better products. I think what we're going to talk about next is what are some of the things we talked, I think, with Kylie on the podcast about how we did a lot of testing where we bring people into our lab where we had the double-sided,
A lot of money.
a
lot of investment.
money, because you have to fly them there.
Right.
It's complicated.
As a space, you have to have the behind the glass.
Yep. The physical,
Not the Mary
space.
behind the glass, but
the double mirrored glass,
Yeah.
so they can. But they know they're being watched, and so they do behave in different ways. Even though we had very sophisticated eye tracking and head tracking software, it still was intimidating, and you don't always get a positive reading from them because they're motivated in a different way.
Well, you say intimidating. It's basically it's natural reaction to the fact of, am I answering this question correctly?
Right. And when you have PhDs walking around who are in charge of research and who act like that, it can be kind of intimidating.
Well, and if you take people out of their natural environment, they're they are going to shift their behavior a little bit.
Yeah. And if you go, like I mentioned before, if you go to the client site and you go and sit like with a lab manager, like I had to, and just let them, complain about what they're doing, they're really only mad about the last thing that happened that week. They're not giving you a full understanding of what the real problem is. And so you have to have a technique to be able to ask the questions in the right way to get to the root cause of what they're really complaining about or what they're concerned about, right? So I didn't know if we want to take a couple minutes to talk about what are some of the things. We talked about A/B testing. We talked about canary testing.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about toggling features. Talked about, we should talk about the different audiences you have, whether you're doing a early adopter group who are going to be more patient with software that's not completed versus just turning something on and seeing how it reacts in the wild.
So I'm going to actually interrupt you here because we've talked about early adopters a few times, Greg. And I think both you and Jessica have had some good experience with that. Like for our listeners that are more in the, I'm like the agile principles and stuff like that, they don't necessarily understand what the whole early adopters thing. Can you kind of elaborate on that? Because I think that's important.
Yeah. So we identify, well, we did two things. One, this is another flaw in the system. We identified the people who were complaining the most, the customers who were complaining the most. And so we invited them to be on this panel that they could give us feedback, but it was really more to keep them on board. So that's not a good motivation.
But how do you identify them?
Well, for that group, it was just the customers who were complaining the most. That's not appropriate.
Oh, okay.
That's not appropriate.
Okay,
right?
I gotcha. Yep.
So what you should do is you should know, working typically with a sales organization, pick a customer who is willing to participate in something because it's going to take their time. And typically you actually want them to pay something, because if they don't pay, they're typically not invested. And so if they're paying, you can say, this is an early version of our software. We want to make you a part of this program because we feel like you have the capacity and the understanding to work with something that's not perfect.
But don't you incentivize them as well? Like, here's a Starbucks gift card for $25.
Depending on what industry you're in, you have to be careful about stuff like that. But you can say, we're going to provide you X amount of licenses at the end of this period so that you or whatever it is that you can.
So that's for K through 12, like because you guys had a very specific market.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking from Jessica's standpoint of those people that are like buying things for big box. Did you guys have kind of like the early adopter, like people you identified?
Yeah, I mean, most of it was about kind of going back to the podcast that you guys had before, was about data. So who is it that's actually using this new stuff that we put out, and then seeing how well it's used. And so keeping things separate. Like here's our whole group of users, right? And here's our subset of people that start using functionality earlier and earlier, and then let's do like a 50-50 split and see which works better when we send it out to those individual people.
So the 50-50 split, where did that information come from?
Data.
Okay.
Yay.
So that's where, yeah.
And so there has to be.
So it's building on what we talked about with Kylie, right? Mm-hmm. Like where it's kind of, instead of, hey, you person, we know, because understandably from you, Greg, and Kylie, you're dealing with educators, administrators, and stuff like that.
No, we did it at the stock exchange too. So it was,
sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So we've done it. I've done it pretty much. And that was like an LMS implementation. But again, we did the same thing. We picked the people who were going to have the most capacity and patience to deal with the fact that they're dealing with imperfect software, and they're going to find things, and then they have to your point about giving them some kind of a incentive, because then they have to report it to you, and they have to go into conversation. And so you got to figure out a way. Mostly it's just making them feel special that they get the first thing.
But it's like 20 to 30 people.
Yeah, it's not a big group.
It's not a big group. Okay.
That's one way to do it.
I mean, there's also just making sure that you have the right state management in place, and knowing like where are people clicking, and how are they clicking, and how are they using it, and why are they using it.
That's what we talked about with Kylie. She built in all of that data sampling.
But that was post. Product. So that's the thing.
That is post.
That's post, and so that's where I'm trying to push us from a director producer standpoint of like this conversation, which is Kylie in the last podcast 2 weeks ago, Greg, talked about how those people that came in, they were sitting there and answering the questions of the 20 plus. It was like a fairly big investment. Like we're gonna have these 20 people come in, the lightning labs. It sounded really cool.
You pull them out of whatever it is that they're doing.
We get them there to wherever they are and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying there's no value to that, because I think there is to a certain extent. But to say that they're going to be unbiased in terms of how they react to things, because you put the three of us in Apollo 13 and we're going to be asked to like click on stuff. We're going to be like, hey, what sort of person is looking outside of Apollo 13 in the green room looking at us and saying, what are we doing? Are we doing it right? Am I like clicking on the thing I'm supposed to? Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and it's not just that. I mean, there's literally politics that can play into it. So like if you're talking about like, a big box retailer and your customer is a sales associate or, a general manager or, whatever, and you bring, a certain group in, which is identified by a specific set of business users, how does that group get picked? And is it friends of friends? And is there, and that can happen. And then you can bring,
there's a cost to that.
Absolutely.
There's a big cost to that, right, Greg? The finance, commie, EVP, I think a dick guy over here, / curmudgeon. Although I've been more of the curmudgeon in this podcast.
I know. Don't steal my thunder.
Yeah, I know. But there's a big cost to that in terms of we're going to spend the time identifying the people, all this kind of stuff, and then we're going to bring them in. And by the way, when they're giving reactions to things, it may be skewed.
Yeah, but even if you don't bring them in, though, if they know they're a part of a test, that's why there's a couple of things. One is
I wish I did more nerd research on this in terms of testing.
Because seriously, there's the pick a group of people who are angry that you're trying to make happy. There's pick my friends and just do that kind of a thing, which at the last startup I was at, that's what we did there. We just basically had friends of the company, and they're all skewed too, because they're, some of them will give real feedback, but
and they all know somebody at quote unquote corporate, and they know what the opinion of that person is, and then whoever's the most popular in the room. Sorry, but it
corporate
turns out
in that case was like 4 people sitting in an office.
Most popular person in the room is first chair people.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, just saying.
I'm just saying.
But chair.
Or you can do what we talked about too, is this toggle concept, which is that you actually release it without telling anybody to it could be a geographical or a certain segment, and just turn it on. Work with it for a couple of days, see how it works, and then turn it off, right? And just do it that way.
And
so
then,
that's anonymous.
And then you're actually dealing with factual information,
right?
And like like it's not somebody saying like, I really feel like blue is the better way to go with this. Like it's actually factual information, and you're actually being able to talk again back about.
And there's probably a blend
customer.
of the two things, right? There's the anonymous, just get the feedback, but you probably do want to have a focus group. And a focus group meaning if there's something that you want to focus on, really having an engaged conversation with somebody. If you take it from both angles, I think that's the best approach.
But I think what Jessica/Connie is trying to say is,
pardon?
Yes, a little something. Sorry. No, but I mean, honestly, it is because in the traditional digital way of doing things in the past is you have those 4 people that are in the marketing and product people and so forth. You have those 4 people. And 3 of them say yes, and 1 of them says, I don't like the color of that button. That doesn't mean shit.
Nope.
It does not mean shit because they're trying. We talked about it with Kylie in the last podcast, which is, hey, you as a person, yeah, you went to school, but you have no idea what being in school is like right now because I'm trying to be a YouTube influencer. I'm trying to like take care of like my family. I'm trying to like do a part-time job.
Well, and then how much time do you spend spinning on that?
Right.
3 people talking to one person about whether or not a button should be blue or green.
It's the main failure. It's the main failure of product is if as a product manager, you can't manage what inputs come in, and you just sit and talk to yourself like it's the worst sin. It's got the devil in it, in fact. To do that because the only way you can understand what works is to get real people using it, right, and doing it and putting them in the right context for what kind of information you're trying to get. So I think it's a mixture of some focus groups bringing face to face, and by the way, it's not only customers. You have salespeople that you have to think about because they're trying to sell stuff. So
that's a good point.
You have to have
this is the product focus where this is get lost a lot, Greg, and then and I've said many times, I hate to give him credit. It really drives me crazy. But I had to give him credit. And mostly because after like Kylie talked in the last podcast, I was like, yeah, someone else is supporting what he's saying. But the truth is,
he doesn't trust me on my own. As long as somebody validates my side.
Ever. But I mean, the concept of moving from, and we've talked about the management debt, corporate debt, whatever you want to talk about it of, people signing off on things and people saying this is the direction we need to go, and you guys saying let's not make it a project. Let's and I think Jessica, where you're dealing with a big box company and you're kind of saying, okay, here's the next project. Well, no, we have multiple products that we're trying to get out there, so like let's concentrate on the product side of things.
And how do we make that the best product it can be?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's a recurring theme, and I think towards the end of the year, we're planning on having a kind of recap, if you will, of the Agile After Dark for the past year. And there's a lot of different subjects that have kind of come up. But I think that's going to be a recurring theme, which is moving from, let's look at a project, because the project-based stuff lends itself to the gateways of things. And that's where the digital side of things are just, they kind of lend themselves to it. And the UX, the design, the development, as I kind of said in the first section, and we kind of broke down the second section where I was challenging you guys, and you guys did a great job of punching me back, little counter punches, right?
Canny punches.
Yeah, canny punches. But I think that the concept of, is there an absolute best way to approach it? I think it depends on the product.
Depends on the product and the industry and
industry and the people that you have that are doing it.
Right.
I mean, that makes a big difference.
Let's stay away from the 4 people that are making the decisions for everything.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yeah, because they don't look at my example. There were 12 people.
You can have all of the profiles and the people that gets them all teared up, like that kind of stuff. Like you can have that, but it's so dynamic and changing now.
Okay, right? Well, why would the services VP sign off on a release? They know nothing about what is going in, what happened, and why.
It's because they're very important.
But that's what it is because they want to be like, I need to be a part of this. Like you said, take credit for something they shouldn't have any credit for. So but I think I still think again, I think this is a newer approach to things. I do think you know what, you said something interesting that I think maybe is a good way to describe the digital thing. It's almost like the bridge or the face of the back end to the customer. The digital thing kind of sits in between, not in between in a bad way, but meaning they're there to help bridge the gap.
Right. Exactly. And
so they're like the front end of the.
Well, let's talk about the large organizations that we tend to deal with. You know, like we talked to Kylie and we've talked to other people in the past where in the other podcasts where they're kind of like, yeah, you know, we kind of have all this shit that's going on over on this end, like to just like understand from a CI, CD, get stuff out to the customers. And then the truth is the two CDs, because of large organizations, they're not willing to put stuff out into production.
Right.
Because they're basically saying we're such a large regulated whatever companies, right, that we'll do a first level CD, but not the other level CD. And the truth is the digital part that's the face.
Right.
That is the face of a company.
That's what I was trying to lead us earlier in the conversation to say, what does digital mean? And it really is, again, it's this kind of interface between all the stuff that happens on the back end and what the customer sees, right? And if you don't have that right, then you're not going to go anywhere. You can have the greatest functionality in the world.
Right.
If it's not usable,
you have the best
care.
database.
If you're
that can do every single thing that you want to do, and you like have all those connections, and like really, really works. And we figured all that out. But when it gets to the customer,
if it's not usable,
yeah, and I'll put my
it.
finance hat on too. Yes. You're just also wasting. You know, what's the I can't remember. You would remember the source for this, but 75% of software features are seldom or never used. Mm-hmm. Right. So you're just you're just wasting money on things and the only way you can figure out if it's worth doing is talking to an actual end user. Like again, Microsoft Word is always a great example that people bring up. How many features in Microsoft Word does the average person actually use?
No, that's exactly
like 10%.
Right. No, exactly right. And I think
I missed the paperclip.
You're the only one in the world.
Is this canny tacking again?
Yeah.
That paperclip was real helpful.
What was his name? Clippy or something like that?
I don't know, but he just showed up whenever I needed him. For gosh sakes.
Hey, Clippy.
He heard. Oh, wait, there's the paperclip again. I got my help now.
In software development circles, that is derided as one of the worst things that was ever created, ever.
Honey, I need help. Oh, no, the paperclip showed up. Never mind.
Here. Clippy's here. He's got hot dish.
He's got...
Oh, he has a spacey recipe. It's got ketchup.
Oh my gosh. To kind of encapsulate what we've talked about, which is waterfall still applicable to digital? I don't think so.
No, it's
a waste of time and money and effort.
Right.
But we're talking about it.
Well, but you and I have talked about is waterfall still applicable in some cases? Because it's not an anti-waterfall thing.
No, but it's what I'm saying is this digital thing is meant to be agile. The inception of what this is can't be nothing but agile. Like it doesn't work any other way.
Yeah.
Well, except that there are companies that are still trying to do that. I mean,
don't backtalk me, Connie.
Pardon you. But there are still companies who are clinging to that, or if not clinging to it, at least saying like, okay, we're gonna go agile and continuing to do those gates and doing all of those things while saying like, but we do stand up.
I don't know what the true answer is, and Jessica, you had experience with the big box company that you worked with in terms of translating some of that. In terms of we had things that from a product side that we needed to get out. Like, what was that blend? Like, we've talked about the UX to design to development.
So that's actually interesting, which I worked with this company for a very long time. And so our designers were actually UX UI.
Oh, okay.
So they were a combination of both.
That's okay. That's a very important distinction.
Yeah.
That's changing.
My experience too.
Well, that's not mine. So but I think if you work with marketing, PR.
Yeah, that's different.
No, I don't think it's different, but I think there's learnings to have because you're still building a digital presence for what the product is. Yeah, no,
that's true. That's true. But I do think, again, we talked about industry, but I think it does.
We both interrupted Kylie. So not Kylie.
No. Connie. No, but
Kyle, I'm sorry, Morgan, party of four. For you?
Morgan for 4?
no, but I think the point is that it does depend on the industry, you know. And but I share your experience. I think it works better when you have somebody who guides that whole process
Yes.
through, because they may not be doing all the design work. They may outsource some of that, you know, meaning whatever that means.
Absolutely.
But
yeah.
but I think somebody who owns that whole experience, or somebody who can, you know, it's like a product manager. They don't like do all of the work, but they guide it, they shepherd it through. And I
Correct.
think-
And then that goes back to like having a library or having a set of rules that if you're working on, you know, a product that spans, you know, there's a lot of teams working on different parts of like a larger product.
and it's for continuity.
Yeah.
Having you know, having some kind of library or some kind of guidebook basically, and then they can just pull from that. But then,
And I hate
but
style
that's-
guide
I mean,
too, but you do have to have some framework to
Yeah.
know, like,
Oh,
we never
framework.
put a button in the right.
Framework.
That's a much better word than, you know, the other things I could
Or
say.
just like, this is our logo. Don't mess with that.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
can't like you know.
Yeah.
or we try to
I mean,
always
it's
have the
just
okay
basic
button in
stuff.
the right hand corner at the bottom, because there's
if it's always there, always there. Again, I mean that goes back to usability, but it's also part of design, right?
All right, you guys have
We just
convinced
muddied the waters.
Sorry, we just
No,
like
no, you
backtrack.
convinced me. But I think from a technology standpoint, there's some new stuff that's out there. We haven't all figured it out. We talked to Kylie, not Connie, last podcast.
Connie, not
Kylie.
Kaylee.
Yeah, Kaylee.
Kaylee, about
Sally.
yeah, Sally, that the canary testing was not there before, from a DevOps standpoint.
Yeah.
Where you can actually say
Yeah.
through the pipeline, we're gonna like, from a true DevOps standpoint, we're gonna like point something out into production for a very small segment, and this is what Netflix is doing. This is what Amazon.
this is the
Sorry,
toggle-
big box
Yeah.
people.
Toggle concept. Yeah.
You know, this is what they're basically putting out there. Now, from a DevOps standpoint, some of them are saying like, is just break something, but I think there's an opportunity for a
Is it
canary testing for UX.
Yeah, you put a sandbox
Absolutely.
out, and
Yes.
you just, that's how you, so it doesn't, so it protects everything else.
Right.
Unless, you know, startups have a much smaller footprint, so they can just turn stuff off and on.
Yeah,
and it's
because they're
easy.
yeah.
But, you know,
But for
unless-
the larger enterprise companies, like, wouldn't it be nice to have actual factual information?
Yeah.
Just turn it on, see what happens.
Yeah.
Turn it off, and be like, ha.
And
all
one
right,
of the
let's learn
groups
from
in the
that.
financial services company I'm working with now, in their life insurance product, actually built a sandbox, and they were actually doing that. So, and they're the only ones that I've ever seen do it, though. And they bypass all the pipelines and stuff like that. They're not. It's separate from that, so you can't.
Interesting.
You have to like figure all that stuff out.
Well, that's
It's
fine.
complicated.
I'm not gonna judge in terms of whether that's the right or wrong way to do it. It's just more of
Really?
yeah, I may judge a little bit.
A little bit
I'm
judgy.
a first chair.
I mean, I can appreciate that, but you know.
I have a fellow first chair. So this is what we're gonna say. We're gonna wrap up.
Sorry.
We have the two first chairs that are here, and I think
That
Connie.
means
This is a
the
hostile work
best
environment
by
all of a
the
sudden.
I think Connie / Jessica is gonna be like. We basically decided we're gonna do a 3-person Agile After Dark group. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Connie's proven herself so
Yeah,
far. I mean,
yeah.
we're still wondering about Jessica, but Connie's
Oh
invited
gosh.
back for sure.
Oh really? Oh gosh.
Yeah, I think Connie is definitely in the running. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
oh well, all right then.
but I hope everyone's enjoyed kind of this. I feel like I've taken over Greg's role a little bit, the curmudgeon EVP of being a dick.
And I thought for this one I would have
You're
less of an opinion about it.
well.
But thank God Jessica and I know what we're talking about, so we kind of set you straight. So that's a good
I'm
That's
sorry.
fair enough.
Guy and I
Fair
are the
enough.
first chairs of digital at this point. We're gonna have to figure out the chair situation.
Yeah, we
this
are
is
gonna
gonna be
figure out
a
the
real
chair.
problem.
Yeah,
You guys have created a hostile work environment for me with your first chair.
Yeah. Well, DuckTales, we're all good.
Yeah.
So anyway,
It rained today.
thanks everyone. I think it was a great conversation. A lot to build on from this. Really good building off of the previous podcast. It was 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, I think.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think I got that straight now.
But send your feedback to feedback@agileafterdark.com or send your rants to rants@agileafterdark.com.
Or you could send your recipes to Kenny at agileafterdark.com. Just make sure it's not too spicy. Don't add any ketchup. That's a bit much.
Brought to you by the word transformation. Transformation. When you want to do a reorg, but you need to sound positive.
So much positivity. Thanks, everyone. We'll catch you on the other show in not 1 week, but 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Bye-bye. Harris?
Yeah.
Ed Harris.
I
Yeah.
didn't even know what you were talking about.
Yeah. So Apollo 13.
Yeah,
You
the
know that
movie.
movie?
Yeah.
So he's the guy on the ground. He's like the remember?
Yeah,
So he's the one that
totally.
goes. He's the one that goes. Everyone's like, "This is what we have on the shuttle."
Like dumps out basically.
dumps out
like,
the whole thing.
duct
right?
tape and some like gum, and is like, all right.
The funny thing is, the visual podcast, Jessica just like pointed at the stuff around us and like this stuff that's around us. That's what he dumps out and says, "We need to figure out this problem."
He did do that for that team to enable them to figure it out, right? I mean,
Yeah.
He didn't have the answers.
Yeah, and so you went from crew cut to like ducktail, like haircut.
Yeah.
Ducktails. Woo.
What's that?
See, now a reference that you
No,
don't
see,
get.
well, because I'm old, and it's probably some.
Dude, you're like a few years older. Ducktails.
I don't know what that is.
See? You don't know the Ducktales?
Was it a cartoon or something?
Yes.
I think I might.